All right, think we're ready to get rolling. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for being here today. We appreciate you joining in on this webinar. My name is Sandy Skolachenko. I work for the recycling program in the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, which is a non-regulatory division within North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality. So I'm just going to go over a couple things before we get into our content today. So this webinar is being recorded. Our plan is to post the video on our website later this week, and we'll send out a link to everyone so you can feel free to reference back to it and share it with anyone who you think may be interested. We'll also post the slides on the website as well in case you want to download those or go grab a link to anything that we've talked about today. So everyone who's on as an attendee should be muted. So we'll be using the chat function in Teams to submit questions. So feel free to submit questions throughout. We have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar, but we probably have some time to work some in throughout if you guys have questions. So send them in anytime. And so I think that's all the boring logistics stuff. So I'm going to hand it off to Wendy Worley. She is our section chief, and she's going to get things started for us.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Wendy Worley, and I am the manager of the Recycling and Materials Management section here in the non-regulatory division within DEQ, as Sandy mentioned our name. I just wanted to, first of all, welcome you all. Multifamily recycling is very important to the state of North Carolina. It is a sector of the population that has traditionally been underserved by recycling services. And our agency has really wanted to put some emphasis behind this effort for quite some time now, and realize that part of one of the barriers for bringing the programming to multifamily units across the state is sometimes that startup funding. So I'm really pleased to be able to offer today this webinar that talks about how to implement a program, and the staff that has helped us put this webinar together has been phenomenal. So hats off to all of the staff that worked on this. But also, probably most importantly, that the reason that is we are able to bring this programming to you all and this funding availability is through a partnership with our partners, the Recycling Partnership. I know we have Matt James with us here today from the Recycling Partnership, who's going to talk to us about the national perspective around this issue, and certainly really welcome that opportunity, because we've been able to bring additional grant funds to communities and private industry throughout North Carolina just to focus on this issue. So really welcome everyone for being here. Please take this opportunity to learn and certainly ask questions of us as they come up, because we really want to see some great applications to this new grant funding opportunity and want to be able to help you deliver these services to the state. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Matt, I'm going to stop sharing and let you get yourself set up, and I'll do a real quick intro for you. You're on it. Anyway, well, here I'm excited to introduce Matt James. He's our friend and former colleague. Earlier this year, Matt joined the Recycling Partnership, and even though he's now focusing on recycling at a national scale, he still lives here in North Carolina, so we think he probably has a vested interest in seeing our state succeed. So I'll let you take things away, Matt.
Thanks, Sandy. You heard me okay?
Yep.
And seeing my slide deck. Cool. All right. Yeah. Hi, Matt James here with the Recycling Partnership. I work as a grant development manager, putting together grant projects and across the country with a big focus on multifamily. The Recycling Partnership, we're a nationwide nonprofit, and our goal is to just kind of increase and improve recycling across the country, whether that's adding new tons or new access. And there's certainly a lot of work to be done for new access in multifamily recycling. Real quick, I'll show our funding partners as a thank you to their support to make our work possible and our grant programs possible. So multifamily recycling has huge potential across the country, especially in North Carolina, for a number of reasons. Well, not we anymore, but when I worked for the state, I would say we did a great job of helping expand single family recycling with carts across the state, whereas most communities right now have some form of curbside recycling in some variety or of another. What is lacking and where we have a huge potential is with multifamily recycling. There's just inequitable access. There's 13 million units across the country that don't have some on-site opportunity to recycle. They might have drop off down the road, but it's not in the actual property where they can easily recycle. And that's obviously a problem. Residents see recycling as part of the brand of the community, as part of the brand of the property, and they demand recycling. Whenever I was moving to a new place, my wife and I, one of the first questions we'd ask walking into the door is, okay, where's the recycling corral? Because if the answer is no, I can't live there. So obviously important to me, and it's important to a lot of Americans. We estimate that of the 13 million units across the country that lack on-site recycling, if 80% capture would yield about 4 million new tons, which would be a fantastic step in the right direction to bring equitable access for those folks that live in multifamily units. However, it's pretty easily said and very difficultly done. There's some common challenges across the entire multifamily sector, not just in North Carolina, but in other states that we work to. We see inconsistent service styles. One community may have drop-off, one may have dumpsters and carts with valet service. It just differs from place to place. And certainly space constraints are always a concern for multifamily property owners. They've budgeted, a certain amount of parking spots for the number of units they have. And sometimes recycling can be an afterthought where we don't have the space to put in, a recycling cart for every 20 units. Of course, contamination is the main concern for the entire recycling industry, and it's certainly a problem in the multifamily population as well. It's a transient population. People are constantly on the move. They have big move-ins and move-outs, which create a lot of waste and recycling that doesn't always end up in the right place. And of course, folks move into different areas that have different recycling rules. And lastly, there's always a big, across the entire recycling industry, a need to expand the languages in which we print our outreach materials. And that's certainly another issue in multifamily recycling. We have several examples of communities we've worked with that have had to print upwards of 10 different languages to best educate their residents on how to recycle in the multifamily properties. So these common challenges can be met with some best management practices. And these are very consistent across all states that we found, and certainly would be in North Carolina too. Just like with single family recycling, consistent education is paramount. Having a uniform message that tells exactly what can be recycled, where, and how to prepare that recycling can help manage residents' expectations for what's going to happen to their recyclables and encourage them to go to the right place and their property to recycle. Often we see that consistent education paired with in-unit containers. We've done a lot of grants to buy 18-gallon or 14-gallon bins that can be distributed and given away to residents as a reminder to them of, okay, here's where I put my bottle cans and paper and glass bottles. And then they can take that entire bin to the recycling corral where they have appropriate signage that directs them to here's where the trash goes, here's where the recycling goes. They shouldn't go in the same container. Of course, using carts and dumpsters kind of depends on the space constraints for each site and the hauling capabilities of the community or the hauler that actually does picking up. And lastly, we've seen a big increase in the amount of valet recycling companies. So valet recycling being workers who come door to door to pick up your garbage or even your recyclables in totes, bins, or bags, and then they take them away to the collection point. It's always a great idea to make sure that the bags, if recycling is collected in bags, aren't contaminating the rest of the recyclables. So if that means working with a MRF to figure out how to break down those bags or breaking them at the source and dumping the actual recyclables into the recycling container. It's always a best practice. So when we give away grants, we often look at in-unit containers like totes or bins. So the totes are a little bit more economical. They're cheaper. They're made out of a easier material than the HDPE bins. But we say the bins are probably more durable. They're probably going to last longer, and they can hold more material. But they're both effective at the end of the day. We've had some data that shows totes are effective. Some other communities prefer bins, but we just think one or the other, doesn't really matter which, but it's still effective to use totes or bins in units, and then compare that with a little bit of outreach. So if we give a grant to a community to hand out 18-gallon bins, we like to put a fridge magnet or a mailer, flyer in there to just remind folks what belongs in the bin and what should be recycled in their containers. This is a little example of the type of outreach material that we've helped develop. This was in Sarasota County, Florida. Just reminds people what they should put in their little 14 or 12-gallon bin there, to put it outside to be collected by valet waste and recycling on a specific day of the week, and then of course refill and repeat. So I believe this flyer actually went out with the bin distribution to remind folks how to properly prepare their recyclables on the correct day. Here's an example of a grant we did with Spokane, Washington. They wanted to educate the folks in their community and help them recycle with totes. They looked at 1,800 multifamily units, and they gave them a tote bag with an info card that was kind of in that plastic sleeve that reminded them what to recycle in their bins. And as a result, we saw a huge decrease in contamination. So giving folks bins and reminding them of what's actually recyclable in that program saw a big decrease in the amount of trash and food, organics, plastic film that was thrown away in the recycling. Another example was San Diego. We helped fund direct door outreach, door-to-door outreach in San Diego, where they printed a bunch of different languages to help serve that population that lived in that neighborhood of San Diego. So again, saw a decrease in contamination as a result of that. But just an example of some of the work that can be done to both hand out in-unit containers and pair that with messaging about recycling. This graph is, I think, one of my favorite slides on here. So we did a project in San Marcos, Texas, and very scientific. We took 3 approaches at 1,000 different units each. So in one unit, we gave a grant to just do education about recycling. In another unit, they received education and an in-unit bin. And in another 1,000 units, they received education, an in-unit bin, and valet service, where workers came by and actually picked up the recycling door to door. Now, as a result, you can see that the valet service with the bin and the education actually had the biggest boost in the material generated for recycling. We think that's probably due to the convenience of valet service. It's just so easy just to put it right outside your door. It's basically like curbside recycling. Of course, bins saw a big boost in the amount of recycling that was generated after the intervention, and education saw a small boost as well. We think the best of all of these is to attack from multiple different angles using valet, bin, and education. However, there are, of course, challenges to overcome with valet recycling too. It's the most expensive option, and if not done correctly, it can end up contaminating the recycling stream. So making sure that you're not throwing away recycling film bags into the recycling is part of the challenge of valet waste recycling. But this is just a cool infographic to demonstrate kind of the more effort we put into multifamily, the better the results are. The Recycling Partnership recently came out with a multifamily guide and toolkit. I believe Keisha Burton and Craig Wittig helped put this together. They're long-standing people who work for the Recycling Partnership, my colleagues, but they helped develop this toolkit that we have available online to help design multifamily recycling programs for property owners and for communities, and give step-by-steps and best practices based on other communities we've worked with in the past. For instance, we did a grant with Orlando, Florida, and they're heavily mentioned in the toolkit and kind of step-by-step of how they introduced their multifamily recycling program. I encourage everyone to check out that link. I think Sandy said they were going to share the slides, and I'd encourage you to use that URL to see the toolkit. Just another example of some of the outreach collateral that we develop and is included in the toolkit. Door hangers, flyers, magnets, all of the above to encourage and educate people to recycle correctly. Again, I just wanted to include this slide with the deck of some of the grant projects we've worked on with multifamily recycling, and we've taken a lot of different approaches to see what works. So we have some pretty good data on all of these communities of what worked, what didn't work. So I'd encourage folks to reach out to us to talk about best practices. And if you have questions for me directly, please reach out. Again, my name is Matt James, and that's my number and my email address.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. While we do a quick transition, I think Elise is going to share our slides for the next portion. I do have one quick question for you, Matt, and hopefully this is not too challenging. But I'm curious about, you mentioned the in-unit containers, the totes versus the bins, where the bins are a little bit more expensive but more durable and last for a longer time. So I'm wondering if you have heard of any best practices or heard of any challenges about when residents leave, like move out of a property, are they taking their bins with them, or is the property able to collect them and give them to the next resident?
I mean, that's a great idea to make sure that you get that back. I think a lot of times they're probably taking the bins with them, but yeah, on move out, when a apartment manager is notified of move out, it's a great idea to reach out to the resident and be like, hey, we'd like to keep that 18-gallon bin that we handed out for free. We'd like to keep that around for the next folks that are moving in, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess if you had to get a new bin, giving it to the new resident is an opportunity for that first push of education as well.
Absolutely. Always a great idea to consider best practice to, when someone moves in, going ahead and providing them with a magnet or a door hanger or a flyer that reminds them of where the recycling is and when to take it out. So certainly best to get that out open in the front of when they move in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, stick around, Matt. If we get questions for you throughout, we'll bring them up again at the end, but thank you for that. So, Elise, you want to advance us to our grant slide? So Wendy mentioned, as we kicked off the webinar, this really unique opportunity that we have with the Recycling Partnership. The Recycling Partnership really gave all of the funding to make this grant program happen. So we really appreciate the opportunity to put their dollars to good work here in North Carolina. So the purpose of this grant program is to fund projects that create new access to recycling or new recovered tonnage from multifamily residential properties. So when we talk about new recovered tonnage, we're willing to fund an expansion to an existing program if it's reasonably going to result in more recycling tons being collected. So the grant funding can support basically any of the things that you need to start or expand a multifamily recycling program. Examples would be equipment purchases like recycling carts or dumpsters, collection vehicles. We can help fund site development work if you needed to put in a concrete pad or install a corral or fencing and gates to set up a recycling area. And we can fund educational materials, which are a required component for this grant. We've heard and will continue to hear how important education is to have a successful program. So these types of things are a lot of the things Matt has already mentioned. It could be signs and labels on the recycling containers themselves. It could be education that goes out to all of your residents, whether that's a flyer, a postcard, a door hanger, a magnet, or even those in-unit containers like a tote or bin that they can use to collect the recyclables in their own homes and then either set out for valet or use to carry down to the recycling containers. So all of those things are types of purchases that the grant can fund. What the grant cannot cover is operational expenses for actually running the program. So, for example, your monthly cost of servicing recycling containers. We want to help you get all the pieces ready to launch a program, but we want to make sure that you have figured out the funding and the budgeting to run the day-to-day operations so that when this grant is up in a year, you're able to sustain the program for the long term. So eligible applicants include multifamily property owners or managers, recycling haulers, and local governments. We're also open to partnerships that might have multiple applicants. So an example may be a multifamily property needs to do some site development work, like establish an area for recycling on property. But then maybe their hauler, who could be a local government or a private company, wants to own the actual containers. Like, say they're going to use dumpsters to collect the recyclables and the hauler wants to buy them and maintain ownership. And then let's say maybe both of you want to partner on the educational component. So both of you are going to have expenditures to get the program going. So you could go in on a grant together and our funding can contribute to all of those components. We just ask in a scenario like that there's one primary applicant who will have the direct grant contract with DEQ. Another kind of scenario that we're open to is if you own or manage multiple properties throughout the state and want to apply for a grant that would bring recycling to many of those properties in different cities, we're open to that too. You could submit one grant application that would cover multiple properties. So some details about the actual funding. We have a minimum of $25,000 per project, a maximum of $250,000 per project. Our grant is a reimbursement style grant. So as a grantee, you would make all of the purchases up front, and then you would submit invoices and proof of payment to us, at which point we would reimburse you the eligible grant funds. And we do have a match requirement as part of this grant program, which is 25%. So if you were to receive $40,000 in grant funding, you would need to contribute at least a 25% match, which would be $10,000, making a total project of $50,000. We are accepting applications on a rolling basis, but we do kind of have a deadline. We've set that at February 16th, 2023. So, you can submit an application anytime and we'll kind of review those and make award decisions as we go. But that deadline is going to be February 16th. So make sure you get an application in by that date. And at the bottom here, I have a link to the actual RFP. And would you mind clicking on that? I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like real quick, if it all works out. Or you can have your cat click on it.
I shared the presentation. And
oh, it's okay. We don't have to open it up.
Share real quick.
So the only thing I wanted to say about this is, especially if you're new to our grant programs, we've tried to make this application as straightforward as possible. You'll see whether we open it here or if you click it later, our RFP is a 9-page document, but there's a lot of detail about what types of programs or what types of projects are eligible, which is kind of what I've just covered, and then some details about how our grant program works in general. So we definitely want everyone to read the full RFP, but when you're ready to put together an application, you'll want to focus in on page 5. That's where we have what we call the required proposal format, which will ask you 7 questions. Yep, here it is. Basically 7 questions about the project, and that is really the meat of the application. And it's really straightforward things like, what types of containers are you going to use for the program? Where are you going to take your materials to be recycled? How are you planning to educate your residents? and how will you measure the results and report those back to us? So, we want to make sure we gather enough information to be sure projects are well planned and set up for success. But it's not an exhaustive grant application, and we're happy to help you figure out the details. We're even happy to review a draft application and give you some feedback before you submit your official proposal. So our contact information is in the RFP. It's also going to be at the end of these slides, so feel free to reach out. And this is great timing because I'm going to let you take it from here, Elise, if you want to do a quick introduction, and then you can just jump right in.
Okay, great. I'm joined here by my cat, who has been sleeping all day, and now that I'm in front of a camera, has decided to join. Sandy, can I ask one clarifying question before I start?
Yes.
For the cash match, is it not different for local governments?
I believe it is.
I'm pretty sure from my understanding, it's 25% for like haulers, property managers, and a 10% cash match for local government applicants.
Yes, that
Unless that
rings
changed.
a bell. Yep. And
Okay.
so I think what we'll do is update that on the slide before we post it
Okay.
online. So the
Sure.
official version out in the world is correct. Yes, thank you for that.
Yes. All right, cool. I thought that might be a nice point to clarify. Okay, thank you so much, Sandy. All right. So my name is Elise Trawick. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I am the graduate intern with DEACS. I am working on program and research assistance in the division, and I spent the better part of my summer working on this multifamily project and kind of gathering information about how it works in North Carolina, how prevalent it is, what kind of issues there are. And so for this part of the webinar, we're just going to kind of walk through how multifamily recycling kind of works in North Carolina and how to set up the program in a bit more of a detailed kind of nitty gritty. Do I need dumpsters? Should I apply with a hauler or not? So hopefully this will help answer any questions that you have after Matt and Sandy did some great information there. And if you have any questions along the way, please do use the chat feature as well, so that we can get those addressed. So to start, Matt did a great job of kind of presenting why this is important, but to bring it and kind of scale it down to the North Carolina level. So about 1 in 5 North Carolina residents are multifamily property residents. And since those areas are traditionally underserved, that equals about 1.8 million residents in North Carolina who have potentially less access to recycling services or convenient recycling services at their homes. And if all of those properties were collected, if all of that material was collected at about the same rate as other places in North Carolina, we would capture about 120 to 200,000 tons of material annually. So especially for local governments, that can be really helpful in helping recycling programs function, is having that material to kind of move through the system. And so this is, as Matt said, a really big opportunity. It's an area of North Carolina and the waste stream that isn't necessarily being captured, that we could really work forward. There's a lot that we can do to help with that. And so looking forward at how do we set up the program, kind of the things that a local government or a property or a hauler even would need to think about in order to kind of put together this grant and start initiating things. I'm going to break it down kind of by the unit of the grant, or whose program it is. And so for a local government who maybe potentially already provides recycling service to single family homes and is wanting to expand it to recycling service, for that model, this would be where the local government is providing that service either in-house through their potentially existing solid waste collection system, or through their contracted service. service that they choose to use as well. And in this case, the local government is also in charge of, paying the fees associated and also collecting any revenue or financing in order to keep the program afloat. And in these situations, it's really beneficial, I think, for the grant fundees or the grantees to sorry, he's very distracting. All right, sorry, restarting. So this kind of program structure is really beneficial. If the local government is wanting to, or maybe already has existing services, or is really wanting to be the one who is initiating those kinds of services as well. And additionally, it's helpful in instances where the infrastructure needed is something like new collection vehicles. If the services are in-house, that would be a situation where a government would want to be sure to be on the grant, and maybe less of the kind of infrastructure that exists on the apartment sites, like concrete pads and those sorts of things. That goes a little more into the property manager side, although, the local government could absolutely use that as well. But just those kinds of situations would be when this style of program would work best. And in that program planning, one key point that a lot of local governments come across is, what does multifamily mean? Because there's, everyone has the idea of, okay, apartment complexes. Well, how big of the apartment complex? Do duplexes count? What about something with just 3 or 4 units? Are we talking about, just the really large complexes? And so knowing your area and kind of what it is that you're looking to serve and what your capacity is, making sure that you kind of define what that maybe unit minimum is, if condos and townhomes are included, and working with public housing units as well, whether to include mobile home parks and multi-use properties. So really just assessing your own needs and capacity, and making sure that you do delineate, which properties are we going to be providing this service to. And so moving on, for property managers, property owners, a program structure for these services is generally pretty simple. It's where the property or property manager wants to contract privately with a private hauler and manage and administer the finances themselves, again, making those payments to the hauler, as well as collecting the financing for the program overall and long term. These, a property-only grant application would be really most beneficial if there are a lot of on-site kind of infrastructure needs, like concrete pads, corrals, dumpsters that the property would like to own, and those sorts of things, as well as the outreach and education materials, which is required for every grant. But for multi-party program structures, which most programs in general are multi-party, but is at least for the for the sake of this grant. So this could look a lot of different ways. I think Sandy did a good job kind of explaining some different situations and scenarios that a multi-party application would work. But one common one would be like a service agreement between the local government and property. Say the local government is, providing the service, the property wants to, own some concrete pads and education materials and be a part of it. They could have an agreement and apply towards a grant together. But we do encourage, in this situation, making sure that you delineate the responsibilities of the program between those two parties. Who's going to collect the fees, who is a point of contact for residents and the hauler potentially, and who's responsible for education, monitoring contamination, and just all of those kind of aspects of the program, making sure it's laid out. And the service agreement with this can vary based on the existing collection services. So if a local government has in-house collection, then it would be, more of just the local government and the property. But if there is a private hauler that potentially the local government contracts with, they could be brought into it as well. And so the kind of shape and structure, I guess, changes based on the different and existing collection services. But also in these situations, the local government can facilitate access to services as well. So we have Joe Suleiman with New Hanover County, who's going to be joining us later. But in their county, for instance, the local government can act as kind of a party or a conduit, I guess, kind of between the properties and the hauler, and kind of provide a framework for the agreement between them. Like here's an agreement that we usually do. They kind of enter into it with the properties and agree to add the service to it. And so kind of just acting as a mediator, I guess not mediator, but, external facilitating party in that. Local governments can also, provide support with education materials if that's what they already have some for single family properties. And then also helping with monitoring and evaluation. A lot of times local government will have, the data that they collect on how much tonnage and recycling that is collected in the municipality maybe. And they can help provide some of that information and share it with the properties to monitor and assess, how successful the program is being and evaluate the services overall. And so in those multi-party agreements, as I said, kind of laying out and delineating those, a really good structure that we definitely encourage and recommend if you do pursue that type of program structure is entering at least into like a memorandum of understanding with the parties, either the hauler, property manager, potentially the local government involved, so that you can really lay out the agreement of the services, who has ownership and control over, what parts of the program, what equipment. And that's helpful even if like only one party is applying for the grant. Outside of this grant, it's good to have that structure and that agreement moving forward. So if just like the local government applies for the grant, but they're going to be working with property managers, then having those MOUs is still very helpful. And an important bit to include is also who's responsible for the education and enforcement aspects, who is communicating with the residents, who's buying and maintaining and updating the materials and those types of things. And so kind of a general outline of the MOU content can just be a statement of, what it is that you guys are agreeing to, a location of the service, and that list of agreements and responsibilities of each party that you want to, that you're making sure to delineate ahead of time. And so for funding of the programs, specifically local government programs, most of them are financed through their existing, solid waste collection structures, if they do have them, such as their solid waste fees, or if they use general fund funding to support their solid waste services as well. The breakdown in North Carolina is that if they do follow a monthly fee, or a solid waste fee model, combined fee for trash and recycling in North Carolina is about $14.53 per month per household, but a standalone recycling fee is about $4.34 per month per household. And so this kind of gives you an idea of the existing fee structures that are out there and kind of a framework for that. And then if you're a local government who uses more general fund allocations to get an idea of, what the cost of this program would be. The national average yearly collection cost per household at multifamily properties is about $20.50. But for single family recycling, it's $28.76 per family. And so if you are following that kind of model, it's good to know that, the multifamily recycling, it is less of a cost per household because of that concentration of properties, and you're able to get so much material with, fewer stops. And so that will help in those allocation calculations as well. For properties and haulers, it's pretty straightforward of a similar charging structure that you have for your existing clients. However, much you charge for, single family pickups per container, following a similar structure for this as well. If depending on the model, this can be charged either kind of directly to the property or through agreements with local government service if you are in those contracts as well. For property managers, kind of getting the funding for this, two options are to actually have a flat recycling fee per unit, added on to the monthly cost of rent, to say like, hey, we're putting recycling at the property, we're going to charge, $4 a month in rent in order for this service, to have this service. These are pretty, visible, they're transparent. It's good, people like to know, where their money is going to, but that can make it maybe not more difficult to adjust, but if you adjust it, it is noticeable as well. So if prices go up or something needs to change there, there is that visible and transparent aspect to these. And then there's the option to just kind of provide it as a service that's included and absorb it into the general cost of rent and operations. It's less transparent than the flat recycling fee, but adjustments to it would require a change in lease, potentially if you need to, increase the rent in order to compensate for this service. That would obviously have to be implemented over time through those lease agreements. So that's kind of the pros and cons to each of those funding structures. And so moving on to collection options, there are several different, methods of collection. The two most common are carts and dumpsters, and this is mostly chosen or selected based on your property's or the property's needs, either the capacity, space restraints, and different kinds of, collection, having to collect, single stream versus separated recycling. And so dumpsters are, they're obviously have larger capacity than the carts. But if you do choose to use dumpsters, not all haulers or local governments, for example, have the vehicles in order to lift up those dumpsters. They require an automated front loader vehicle. And they also generally will require the pouring of some kind of concrete pad to help support the dumpster and gain access to it as well. Carts have less of that capacity and they're less durable than the dumpsters, but they can be, as this picture shows, kind of, wrapped around if there are, space constraints and they need to be kind of spread out or put in kind of just odd places. Carts also have more collection options with the types of vehicles. So you can use an automated side loader, a manual rear loader. They're generally less restricted as to the types of vehicles that can be used with them. And additionally, carts, again, as though they do have the lower capacity, which is kind of one of the biggest struggles with them. They do tend to attract less large scale contamination than dumpsters do. There's, stories of, mattresses in a recycling dumpster, and obviously carts can't hold a mattress. And so they do tend to attract more of that, less of that illegal dumping than a dumpster might as well. And then there is the option for roll-off containers. So these are generally at just one site on a property, and they're great if you need to separate the materials ahead of time. You can have different slots in them in the big unit for the different types of materials. And these work where the vehicle comes and takes the entire container off-site and empties it off-site and then returns it to the property. And so obviously that does require that type of collection vehicle, and these are less able to be spread around a large community, a large property or widespread one, but they're helpful again, like I said, for those sorting, and if you have, say, a more condensed kind of property and you really just need one site where everybody can bring their materials to. It works a bit more like a drop-off. And then there's always the choice to do a combination. Some properties will choose to use a dumpster to collect cardboard, for example, and then carts for the other types of materials. And so again, just assessing your community's capacity, needs, and what will work for you, and taking some time to kind of look at the properties and come up with a plan and plan ahead. For those vehicles, here are the examples. The automated side loader there, they have lots of many places, and local governments have been, moving on to these types of collection vehicles. They work for carts, and they don't require, manual collection like the rear loader does here, but that's also an option for carts as well. And then the automated front loader there is the only vehicle that I'm aware of that can collect those dumpsters, or at least the most common one for that. And so assessing the different types of vehicles you have available will definitely inform the types of collection containers you use as well. And then there is corrals. So at the properties, corrals are very helpful for organizing stations. As you can see here, kind of keeping, especially if you have a lot of carts, keeping them nested and together in one place. They also help with aesthetics if, properties don't want a lot of carts hanging around and ruining they don't want that unsightliness. It can really help keep things, look a lot better, keep property values up potentially. And then some locations do have regulations around needing to have certain types of corrals or fencing around dumpsters. And so before you choose to, put up any kinds of structure, obviously, definitely make sure it's within the building regulations for wherever you are located. And then determining, capacity is really a challenge sometimes. It's like, well, how much recycling does this property that's never had it need? And so on the right here, I found on Waste Management's website of, their recommended carts and types of service based on the property units. However, this can vary really greatly. I know some local governments will do, one cart for, I don't know, 10 or 15 or something units like that. And so it really does depend on the needs and the amount of material at the property. And so this is why it can be really important to monitor, how full these containers are, doing, every few weeks checking, are they a little bit full, are they overflowing, and adjusting the service as necessary, either adding more or fewer pickup times, or changing the amount or size of the containers that are available. And so when it comes to implementing, you've planned it, you've decided, oh, we need some dumpsters, we need a corral, all of this. Implementing and maintaining it, one of the most key aspects of the entire program being successful is communication. Communication not only between the parties, like the local governments, the properties, the haulers, but also with the residents as well. The two rules of thumb for communication is early and often. If you're going to be getting the recycling program, go ahead and start getting those materials and those education pieces out. And then make sure you're updating it regularly. People, we forget. So early and often is always the best in these programs. And in the program, make sure it's good to develop a communication plan so that you outline, okay, like if there's, a missed pickup, residents need to call this person, or if there are contamination issues, the property can reach out here, so that there's no confusion when those issues do appear. And then also establishing the needs for regular outreach and education, like we'll, update and release new flyers every, I don't know, year or however often, or whenever turnover happens, making sure to have a protocol and plan for that as well. It's also really helpful to maintain a database of contacts, particularly if you're a local government servicing, a bunch of properties, because not only do, property residents turn over frequently, but property managers can turn over frequently, owners can turn over frequently. And so keeping that updated and in an accessible place can really help with program efficiency and keeping things moving well. And then also getting regular, feedback and input from residents and stakeholders, particularly with residents having, listening sessions, webinars, just opportunities to connect and hear their input. It helps a lot with getting, not only that feedback, but also the buy-in from the community. They've, sat down and given you their opinion, and now they're more engaged and wanting to keep the program moving forward. So seeking out that input from the residents and from the stakeholders in the program is very helpful as well. And then education, it is obviously a part of communication, but it is really one of the biggest key parts of the communication, and is imperative for program success. If people don't know that it's a recycling bin or what to put in it, then it's not going to be used properly. People don't know. And so it can take the form of, stickers on bins, flyers, cart tags. Matt gave a lot of really great examples earlier. And it's really essential for limiting that contamination, because if your recycling is too overly contaminated, it can't be recycled. In a lot of places, it needs to just be landfilled. And it's also, as Sandy said, a required component of this grant funding. For education materials and joint applications, it's helpful to determine and lay out who is in charge of, distributing them, purchasing them, and kind of keeping them up to date and implementing that regularly as well. Luckily, DEACS has some really great materials already made up. We have these on our website. You can go and just download these flyers and brochures. But we also have them, you can put it in and they're adjustable, based on, the needs of the place. So say you're a local government who doesn't accept glass, we can go in and remove that part and make it, accurate for the collection needs of your location. We have it in plenty of forms. And these materials are really versatile, including with the valet service that you see. As Matt said, it can be really beneficial. Like when it works well, it works really well. But when there are issues with it, it can be a challenge. And so we're finding that, education, not only of the residents, but also the valet employees themselves, or the porters themselves, is really helpful with that. Printing the guidelines, having a bin and a tote is wonderful. And then having those guidelines and rules right on them is even more helpful. And so on the right here, Orange County, got these totes printed and distributed them to a lot of their multifamily properties throughout the county. And they did notice both participation in the program went up at most of these properties and contamination went down as well. And so these are kind of a double whammy, these totes. And these are, helpful for places that don't have valet service as well. But if that is a component that can really help to counteract or get ahead of the issue with not debagging materials. And so kind of making that just less of an issue. And then once you've implemented, everything's going, it is important to keep monitoring the program, making sure that it's being used properly, so that you can, when you look back and say, oh, is it worth the however much, we spent on this program, you can say, yes, we've gotten, materials from it, we've, had low contamination rates, et cetera. And so making sure that you monitor the use of the program and assessing its effectiveness is also really helpful. Regularly monitoring tonnage, if you have that ability, if you're a local government or a hauler, is really helpful to know, just how effective it's being. And you can also monitor participation, which is a little bit, tonnage usually helps to measure participation, but there are some other ways as well, just kind of, surveys, how many of my residents are using this, and those kinds of things. Also keeping an eye on contamination. You might not have like a full audit to give you a percentage, but if you're a property manager, just having someone who can go around and glance in the bins every so often and kind of give you an estimate of how overly or not contaminated it is, and keeping an eye on that. And then also monitoring the program costs, again, to help you compare like efficiency and effectiveness down the road. So if you have any questions about all of that information, please do feel free to reach out. Here's our contact information. I'll have it up again at the very end of the webinar. But I think we're going to transition now into panel time.
Yes, thank you so much, Elise. That was really great information. And it's really great that everyone will have access to these slides. I am going to invite all of our panelists. I see Delbert and Tom and Joe as well. You can unmute yourself. And Elise is going to transition us into our panel discussion. And I think she'll go ahead and prompt you all to give us a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sandy. Yeah, absolutely. So this next part is luckily going to be less of me talking at everyone, and we're going to get some practitioners, people who have, managed or implemented these programs in various aspects. So we're super grateful that these three have agreed to come here and answer our questions and kind of give us the on-the-ground insight from people who've actually done this successfully. And so we have Delbert Bryant, who's the sanitation manager of the city of Greenville, Thomas Wisnant, who is owner and senior HOA manager at Trek Management, as well as Joe Suleiman, the environmental management director of New Hanover County. So Delbert, I am going to turn it over to you to give kind of a brief introduction of yourself.
I'm glad to be here. I'm Delbert Bryant. I'm the sanitation manager for the city of Greenville. I've been in this position for about 15 years. We've had a good working relationship with DEQ, and they're great to work with along the grant lines. The city of Greenville has been a recipient of grants, and we're glad to say that has helped us build our program to where it is today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Delbert. All right, Thomas.
Yes, thank you so much, Elise. I'm Tom Wisnant. I'm the owner and senior manager at Trek Management. We manage multifamily communities, and personally I've managed communities from about 2 units to about 2,000 units. I have a wide range of experience and very excited to be here to share things that I've found that help multifamily communities recycle. And I do agree they're underserved, and tapping into that waste stream that's now not being recycled, I think is a very exciting opportunity for all of us. So thank you for your good work in that direction.
Thank you so much, Tom. We're glad to have you here. Joe, can you give us a greeting?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Joe Suleiman with New Hanover County Department of Environmental Management. We've also been lucky enough to be recipients of DEACS grant funding, one of which was for our multifamily project. So looking forward to sharing our lessons learned from that.
Thanks, Joe. All right. I'm going to dive in to some questions that we have here. And before I do get in, I want to say that if participants, if you guys have any questions for our panelists, please do feel free to put them into that chat. We're going to get to them for a little Q&A afterwards. But just to start, we'll start in the same order and start with Delbert. How have residents responded to having the recycling services available in Greenville?
It's been very positive. It's been well received. We often get calls into the office for complexes that do not have multifamily recycling, which was stated earlier, that people really want to recycle. And you give them the opportunity and the information, they're glad to do it. We have a college here, and we have a lot of off-campus students, so sometimes it can be challenging, but if the information is there and the availability of recycling, they do take advantage of it.
Great.
So it's been very positive.
Yes, thanks. I appreciate that. That's great to know. Tom, what about at your properties? Because you've managed them directly.
Mm-hmm. I have, and I think most of the residents are pretty well informed about recycling and overall do a great job. I think many of our communities, at least a couple of my communities that I manage, I think have a greater recycling stream than trash stream, which I love to see. Our blue bins fill up faster than our green bins, and the communities that have bins. So that's fantastic to see. And I agree that if you make it easier to do, most people want to do the right thing, but if it's inconvenient, they'll be lazy and just throw things away. So the more we can do to educate people and facilitate recycling, I think the more positive results we'll see.
Thank you, Tom. Joe, what about in New Hanover County?
Well, as many of you know, New Hanover County is mainly populated by people who aren't from New Hanover County. We get a lot of folks from the Northeast that come down here to vacation and never leave. So, you know, there was an underlying current of, you know, back where I come from, you know, all the apartment complexes have recycling programs, but none of them down here do. And so our office got a fair bit of phone calls about what do I need to do to get recycling started in my community. And until this grant opportunity came available and we started putting two together, we really never realized that the residents had that strong desire to recycle, and those needs weren't being met. So it was a really easy start to the program.
Awesome, thanks. I'll switch up the order here and go back to Tom. What like specific you know, measures or actions have you taken to educate your residents about recycling and encourage their participation?
Well, I know earlier someone actually showed some of the bags that Orange County made, and we have participated in just about all of our Orange County communities with those bags, which are great. We have distributed those to individual homes, hung them on doors, emailed people, let them know they're out there, and those not only give them a vehicle to recycle, but also have instructions and pictures on the outside. So that's been very helpful in the communities that we've implemented that. And I guess Orange County paid for those. I'm not sure if that was with some of your grant funding or how, but those were provided free of cost to our communities, and they delivered them to the communities. We picked up some communities. I think that was a big help. Personally, I've gotten a lot of signage, and mostly I've just gone with a drill and put those up myself at corrals, you know, kind of see where it works. I'm very hands-on, so I take the recycle right signs and put them up, educate people. I think luckily probably about 95% of the people in our multifamily communities have email. We still have a handful of people that don't have a computer, if you can believe that. So we try to be aware of those people and reach out to them to make sure they can participate in some type of more low-tech way. Putting up signage, putting up things like the real estate signs, like the 18 by 24 yard signs. We've put those up sometimes in communities so people see them driving through. Anything we can do to encourage people. Almost every community has some type of person who kind of self-designates themselves as the recycling police. I found actually had one neighbor follow me out to my recycling bin one day and stood there and watched what I was putting in there. I couldn't believe it. But typically I find as a manager, there's always one or two people that are kind of watching and posting things on listservs. Oh, look, and with photographs of my neighborhood. Oh, look what I found in recycling today. And they'll send a picture of whatever they found in the recycling bin and complain about it. So I think their intent is good. So I think there's definitely some peer pressure if neighbors are aware their neighbors aren't recycling or aren't recycling properly. I've seen more than once them kind of encourage each other to kind of do a better job. So that's something that kind of happens organically, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Tom. Delbert, how about in Greenville?
In Greenville, we have taken a couple of approaches. We do use our city cable TV channel for information to the residents. We also use the social media, as was mentioned previously. We are able to put a bulletin in our utility billing to educate residents. Also, I personally have taken time out after work to visit some of the complexes, multifamily complexes, that have invited me to talk to their residents about recycling. So it's been an in-person visit sometimes when they're capable of accommodating me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, grateful that Greenville has you, Delbert, to go down and give those talks.
Yes.
Joe, how about New Hanover?
So whenever we start a new multifamily complex with the recycling program, we give them a stack of slick sheets that we stole shamelessly from the Recycle Right campaign that do get handed out in the packets for every new resident. Then after China's national sword policy kicked in, we noticed in the media there was a lot of false narratives about us just hauling stuff to the landfill and don't bother to recycle. So we made sure we followed up with a campaign to get, set the story straight regarding that. And that was just reaching out to the property management companies and getting permission to do door hangers, where we explained the local situation here and how it hadn't changed, and that we were very lucky to partner with a company that essentially created a subsidiary to supply material to their own packaging company. So that was very well received. And similar to Dilbert, we also, either myself or an intern, on an annual basis would again coordinate with the property management company for their common areas to do a short 30 to 45-minute presentation about recycling. That way we're catching anybody that may have fallen behind or is getting bad information. And we'll schedule a half an hour, but it ends up being closer to 2 just because there's so many questions. So to me, that shows there's a level of interest and that people really do want to do the right thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. As someone who used to give similar types of presentations, they do go long with lots of questions. Great, thank you. Okay, actually, I'm gonna stay on you, Joe. What's the biggest challenge that you've been facing with the program?
I would say there were 2. One is stolen carts. We exclusively use the carts, and routinely get calls from the property management companies to replace missing carts. And I said the second one would be for certain complexes. I don't know why, just contamination seemed to be higher. So we would focus more education efforts on those areas. So yeah, contamination and missing carts.
That's fun. Okay, Tom, what about you? Tom? All right, we'll move on to Delbert. He might be having issues.
Okay. Some of the biggest challenges, I must reiterate that the carts often go missing. I don't know whether it's somebody using them as a container for moving or not, but replacement of carts is an issue. But also just wanted to speak to starting the program. It just had to be mindful of the getting people to buy in, and the space that's limited in multifamilies. That was some of the bigger challenges I had when we started our multifamily program.
Gotcha. How did you get them involved, if you don't mind me following up?
Well, I kept trying to sell the importance of recycling, and we also did what was mentioned earlier about telling people that people want recycling. This is a point that your multifamily business can sell to their residents as they come in, is that you offer, and the city offers, an opportunity for you to recycle.
That's great. Thank you, Delbert.
The other thing that I would say is that Greenville's makeup of multifamily and single family is pretty close to 50-50. So there was a large portion of our residents that we wanted to make sure had an opportunity to receive recycling services.
Yeah, really big need. That's great. That's good to know. Thank you. Tom, have you popped back up? All right, he might be having some issues, but we can move on to the next question and get his perspective if he pops back in later. Joe, what is one lesson that you've learned? Like if you can share, one thing that really, really helped in these programs that they can take away, what is it?
I'm feeling generous, so I'm going to give you two. One is make sure that you put recycling carts at the gang mailboxes for these complexes. It's so convenient, and the material you get out of there is almost contaminant free.
Yeah.
And the other one is we used an intern to kind of kick off the program, and I didn't realize until we started collection that this intern had no idea how much of a turning radius a rear load or an automated side load truck needs. So don't work with the complex managers on placing carts unless you know a truck can get in and out of there without creating a lot of issues.
That's fun. Great, thank you. Delbert, what about your takeaways?
What I want to say is one lesson that we learned, I can also agree with what was just said, but also is that when we started our multifamily process, we made sure that it was added into the planning process that new developments had to include recycling areas. And so that was big for us. As new multifamily sites come on, it's already incorporated that they will have the service.
Mm-hmm.
They will allot room. Yeah, they will allot room for the containers and everything.
That's great. Yeah, that addresses what Matt was saying earlier as well. Tom, I got a notification from you. Are you able to hop in? Nope. All righty. Well, then we are going to wrap it up with a nice little heartwarming question, Delbert. What's been your biggest inspiration or motivation for keeping things moving forward?
Really is the commitment to provide a similar level of service that we have for all of our residents. We wanted to try to be as equal as we could across the board for everybody. And also, we wanted people to understand that recycling is very important, regardless of where you live.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Right. Joe, what about in New Hanover?
It happens so often, but I always get tickled when it does. But I've received a lot of calls from residents just to thank us. And what happens is they'll learn whether they're visiting a friend or just hear about it. A complex starts a program, and the call is, how do we get on board? How do we get started? How do we expand this program? What's the trick to we want to get involved. So that was very inspirational, especially at the start of the program, knowing that word got out so quickly.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Tom, I think I saw your microphone blink. All right. Wendy?
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to thank the panelists so much for all your insights. I really think that your experience is something that we have learned from as a staff, and we want to share out to other communities and property management companies all across the state. So I'll just pop in first just to say thank you so much for joining us today. As I was listening to the conversation and the presentations throughout this webinar, I was thinking about what are the key takeaways that we want to share out and learn from our colleagues. And mainly, what we've seen all across the board is that residents all across the state, no matter whether you're in any different kinds of housing unit, they want to recycle. It's a really strong desire to participate in an environmental activity that they know they can have direct impact on. And we've seen that time and time again, whether it be part of a larger community, traditional curbside service that they want to make sure is maintained, but also as the panelists and all of our other speakers have engaged with, residents and multifamilies are anxious to participate and more than willing to do so. So we are so pleased to be able to have the opportunity to work with you all across the state and with our national partners with the Recycling Partnership to bring the funding and the technical support to you to help support that programming and to expand that service across the state. And the other thing I wanted to, as a key takeaway, it seems to me that, when thinking about implementing a multifamily program, there's a lot of different variables. There's a lot of logistics to kind of work through. But hopefully, as part of this presentation, you've seen that there are resources available to help you do that. The Recycling Partnership in the beginning talked about the guide to multifamily recycling. That's a wonderful educational piece that kind of helps walk through some program decisions that you might need to be able to consider. But also through this presentation and the research that Elise presented on and that she did over the summer with us, a wealth of information about different program ideas that we're willing to share out and talk to you one-on-one or as a call out to work with your community to build a program that works for you. So lean on us. All of the folks on this call are more than willing to help you with that process, and know that there are additional education resources available as well. So Elise showed in one of her slides the education and outreach materials that we've developed here at the state for multifamily units in particular. But know that we have a graphic artist on staff that is willing and able to customize that for whatever community need you have. And some of those examples, it's not just a sign, it's not just a brochure, a door hanger, but we can also work to customize that on a tote that you might want to implement in your program. So those are resources that are available to you to help bring this programming to North Carolina multifamily folks. And of course, the funding that's available. I noticed in the chat, there was one question about the total amount of money that is available. And I know Sandy answered it in the chat, but I'll also say it out loud. So the total amount of funding that we have specific to the multifamily program and this grant is $250,000, courtesy, thank you, of the Recycling Partnership. And we bring those dollars to you. The projects we can imagine can range from a smaller project all the way up to potentially using that entire funding amount. So that's why you saw that large range of money available per project. But certainly we would like to see multiple applications in this project to make the biggest bang for our buck and really get that funding out to the communities that need it to implement the program. So I've rambled on, but I really wanted those key points to come out. I want to open it up if anyone else has additional questions or comments from the panel from our partners at the Recycling Partnership. If anyone wants to make some final remarks, please feel free to share or ask out those questions.
Thank you. Hey, Elise, is my microphone on?
You're
This
back,
is Tom.
Thomas. Yay.
I don't know what's going on with this camera. It's crazy. I'm going to recycle this computer, I think.
Oh, it needs it. Give it
not
new
that
life.
old. It's not that old, but it's been causing problems. I did want to say, as far as inspiration, one thing that really inspires me as a manager is, personally, I'm very concerned about the environment and our environmental future. As a manager, I feel like I really have an opportunity to replicate and strengthen my own personal efforts, because I'm in a position to influence and encourage hundreds or even thousands of people to recycle. So that really inspires me to think, hey, Tom, there's very little I can do, but what if I could get 500 people to do a better job of recycling in the communities I manage. And I really like that. That feels good. That feels really good to me to be in that position. Also for managers, remember you're in a position as an influencer to set budgets. And I always try to encourage the boards that I work with, the board of directors for communities, to include bigger budgets for recycling, composting, things of that in their annual budget. So I think managers are in a good position to try to obtain more financial support from their communities. We're talking about the prices per door and that type of thing, and educating people that it is worth doing and trying to provide those resources within the community in addition to the good work that you're doing statewide and locally.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, much appreciated, and glad you were able to make it back on. So as Wendy said, do any of our presenters have any final thoughts they want to share before we wrap up for today?
No, just good luck, everybody, with a successful program. It really does make a difference.
Thanks for inviting me, and good luck, everyone.
Thank you so much, Delbert.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I really
Thank you,
appreciate the
Tom.
opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and echo that. And the state's office is very robust, and certainly we're happy to be partnering with y'all in CDEQ. And for anyone that's thinking about applying, we would be working with some great partners in the state office.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyone who does apply, you've got a lot of support behind you between our office, these experts who have been part of our panel, and the recycling partnership to make sure that your program will be a success. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. I think Wendy has one final thing to
Yes,
note.
before you completely close us out, Sandy, I did just want to mention as a sidebar that we in DEQ have other programming that is directed to multifamily projects and communities. So wanted to let you know about another opportunity that our Department of our Division of Air Quality also has for multifamily units relative to getting rebates on charging ports for electric vehicles. I will make sure to share that in the chat real quick for some contact information, but just wanted you to know that other folks within our department as a whole are also working towards multifamily initiatives, and wanted to make sure that opportunity is available to you as well.
Great, thank you so much. And we can share that link when we send the link to the website where all the webinar materials are posted. So thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Have a great evening, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you.